So we have our next session with Adrian, who is going to talk about AI, worst superhero or best janitor. Adrian, and during the talk, if you have any questions, please post it to Slido or wait until the end of the session. If we have time, we'll go through it. But over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Who here saw the keynote this morning? Yeah, from Caleb? Yeah. Yeah, so I watched that. I was wondering if this was going to be the counterpoint to that. And I think some of it's going to be. I think we agree on some things. But as you can tell from the title, this is the whole thing. You know, you can leave now if you get what I'm saying with the title here. Basically, by over-pitching what AI can do, you can do damage to the technology, to what is a useful technology, clearly. Tons of people are using it today. How many people are using generative AI on a daily basis today? Weekly basis? Are there more hands? Yeah. Yeah, so clearly it's a useful technology, and I think that's one of the key things here, is that we can reach out and use it, which has not been the case in the past. You know, when we've been pitched AI on things, machine learning models, things like that, not nearly as accessible. Nobody built a chatbot front end for these things that made it quite as accessible as this is today. We didn't have tons of open source, large language models you can run off your discrete GPU laptop. So for this, I used a lot of AI to build decks, at least to get the idea started and go. And this is an example. Not only the slides, but the images here were AI generated. And you can probably tell if you've seen AI generated images, they kind of pop out as AI generated. I didn't ask it to put cats in there. I have no idea why the cats are in there. And I couldn't get it to do exactly what I wanted, which is kind of a theme with generative AI at this point. Like, it gets like 80% of the way there. But the title is Worst Superhero or Best Janitor, which was part of the prompt for this image. But there's no like worst and best. Like the superheroes doing janitorial stuff, like the superheroes carrying a basket. I couldn't get it to get it right, and that's kind of a theme with generative AI at this point. So, and maybe the AI just doesn't want to show the AI doing a bad job at stuff. Maybe that's one of the issues that I ran into. So if you don't know me, you can Google me, find a bunch of stuff, but I do a podcast. I run B-Sides Knoxville. It's our 10th year this year. You might have noticed on the back of the booklet, we're like the third down from the top. So it's coming up real soon, May 24th. If you're anywhere near East Tennessee, it'll be a good time. And tickets are available. And faculty over at IANS. And that's pretty much me right now. So as we've established, it can be useful, but we keep, seeing these pitches, hearing these pitches, trying to elevate it to the point where it's, the way I'm thinking of it is it can save time, but, it can't do miracles, right? It can't go quite as far as some people are promising. And I think to understand why this happens in security, and this is just, AI happens to be the big thing now. If you've come to RSA or B-Sides in the past, you've seen the buzzwords come and go. And I think Jay Jacobs, Wade Baker, and Alex Pinto did a talk a few years ago at RSA where they took all the titles from all the RSA events ever, from all the talks, and kind of compiled and showed the trend of buzzwords over time. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why that happens from a marketing and a market perspective, and what generative AI is actually good at, and what we should be pushing for it to use it for. Yeah, so this is I think most people in here are going to agree with most of this. So kind of the point of this is to give you some argument points, some talking points, an idea of how we can be good stewards of the technology, without getting it. I think the real danger here is somebody promises too much at an organization and it just gets cut out. Like the execs don't want to see it. It failed at that big project that one time. We're not going to use it ever again. And turns out this has happened before. And And yeah, so this is basically the cycle, and we're going to get into the cycle a little bit. So VCs like moonshots. That's kind of the whole thing behind VC funding, is we're going to fund a bunch of stuff, hoping that one of them is a moonshot that brings back some big returns. And a lot of overhyped tech fails, to the point where we're all probably burned out hearing about the claims. None of us believe them anyway. And then useful tech gets shunned, and we'll get into some examples here. So a more, not a cybersecurity specific example, but Watson was a big example of this. Swung hard and missed with a lot of it, especially in healthcare, but pretty much everything Watson did. And they're trying to bring it back now with LLMs. They're trying to rehash the Watson name. So this is a great example of that. And I actually gave an early version of this talk at a very small internal offensive security summit conference, and learned from the keynote speaker there that this has actually happened before with AI. It's happened not once but twice. AI has been overpromised so much that apparently back in the 1980s and 1990s, the best way to get your grant money denied was to mention AI. And now here we are. Last year, I was working for a company called Valence Security. We were one of the 10 companies in the Innovation Sandbox, and we actually got dinged for being the only company not mentioning AI. So things kind of come around full circle here. And this time is a bit different, and we're going to talk about why. So the reason hype happens, especially today, where trying to do outbound sales and marketing, email is burned. Nobody wants to respond to an email. Good luck trying to sell something over email or even over LinkedIn these days. People kind of move as they burn one medium, and people are just bombarded with stuff to another. And they really feel like they've got to sell 1,000 to be able to sell something that can do 100, right? With the idea that, 1,000, we'll get to 1,000 in 2 or 3 years. It'll be on the roadmap. But just to get somebody's attention, the general thought process, behind your marketing and sales folks is that you have to overpromise on what you're gonna sell them. And generally, this is the path we see it take. Where it really happens fast with a lot of these new categories that pop up. So other industries, you'll see things go C, D, E, F, G, and you'll see that in our industry as well. But the acquisitions really start around seed even sometimes these days. Occasionally you'll see companies that haven't even come out of stealth and already they're getting acquired. And there's some problems with that, which we'll also get into. So this is a general process that we'll see a market go through. So not just an individual company, but an entire market will kind of create this vision. You'll see one company, maybe have this idea started. You'll see a bunch of, I don't want to call them copycats, because oftentimes the best companies aren't the very first ones to enter the market. But other people will iterate in that same idea or do something similar to that same idea. And then bold promises, once you get the budget, you can really kind of plaster those promises everywhere. The kind of stuff that you've seen when you arrived in the airport, just walking around San Francisco. It's on the side of cars. It's this advertising is everywhere. And then in other markets, what happens is we get this managed disillusionment stage here, where if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, this is the big crash after like the height of all the hype. And oftentimes it doesn't happen in security. And that's that problem I was talking about earlier, which if we move to the next slide here, if you get acquired before we go through that difficult part of, okay, what can this technology do? What can we salvage from all the promises we made? Can we salvage something useful? And the answer is often yes. But if we never make it to those stages, if all the acquisitions in that market occur, oftentimes you'll just see markets disappear. And there's no story. There's no, I remember them getting acquired by Symantec, but then poof, nothing. The product just wasn't available a year after that for some reason, or was never available after the acquisition. Was it a problem with due diligence? Who knows? But oftentimes, I'll see products that fundamentally don't even work, make it pretty far through this stage and get acquired. And here's some examples where useful technology gets overhyped and it really hurts that market, hurts that technology, and we see it get reinvented years later. So application control at one point was promising the end of malware. We're going to create a static list of all the stuff that can execute, and then malware won't work, right? And as often we see with these cases, the idea, technically, yes, that works. You could do that, but that's just not how businesses work. Your devs are going to be installing new stuff on a daily basis. You can't manage that static list of application control, of what's allowed and not allowed to execute on devices. And same thing with microsegmentation, scaling that, really tough problem. But we still see companies going after some of these, and either they find a niche where this technology makes sense. When the promise was this is going to be used enterprise-wide. Then with NAC, we saw it used for guest networks. It found a nice niche there and in some other places. Maybe devices that don't change often. But this kind of cycle, we see this happen over and over and over. And usually it's one of these three things. It's usually the amount of labor put on the buyer is too much. We've seen SIM reinvented how many times now? Because somebody forgot to mention you need SIM developers. You need people who can build parsers, custom parsers, and maintain those parsers. You need people who can build reports. Oh, and by the way, when logs stop coming into the SIM, it's not a feature of the SIM that'll let you know that the logs stopped coming in, so you got to build that yourself. I've been through this a few times myself. And scalability, yeah, it's a good idea, but you scale it to a company of 100,000 people, or a couple thousand devices, all of a sudden it doesn't work well. Or complexity itself, just in the lab it worked great. We released it into the real world, and there were just 1,000 edge cases that just made it completely unusable. So usually one of those three things. So what's different here? I'll have to keep an eye on time because there's a lot to. It is a bit of a rant. There's a lot to say here. What's different here is with a lot of these technologies, particularly in security, they haven't been available to really suss out and test like this has. OpenAI decided to just thrust this in front of consumers for free, and then they added on the $20 a month option for the better model and some additional features. And that's really the bullshit test, right? Give me access to it, let me use it. Freemium products, open source products stand the test of time because you can just grab it and use it. If an open source project is popular, if it's got a bunch of stars, if there's a bunch of people using it, it's because it works, right? And on the commercial side of things, it's really a guess. It's a proof of concept. Maybe you've talked to the company for 2 months before you even get to the proof of concept. Before you even get to that moment where, does this even work? Where you find that out, where you learn that. And it's very late in the stage. It's very expensive to get to that point. So, yeah, generative AI is different because of that. There's so much open source stuff out there, the Meta Llama stuff, that I think we will see this stick around in some form. Doesn't matter how overhyped it gets, it's going to be here to stay in some form for good, I think. And mostly because there's so much open source stuff out there already. So many people are building stuff, sharing what they're building. That momentum's already there. It's not going away. So strengths and weaknesses, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You've probably seen this 3 or 4 times today. I don't know how many of these slides you've seen. Caleb, if you saw the keynote, did a great job of talking through what it's good at, what it's not good at. Oftentimes I sum it up as math and facts it's not great at. Anything that's deterministic, where there's a right or a wrong answer, not great. But we've got solutions for that. We can give it fine-tuning data. We can give it grounding data. We can give it system prompts. There's a lot of different features now. RAGs, to prevent it from hallucinating. So already in this technology, that's the other interesting thing here is how quickly it improves. Things we were making fun of, we were laughing at 12 months ago, is mostly a solved problem with a lot of this stuff. And of course, there's still problems today. And, maybe 6 months from now, 8 months from now, there'll be some answers for that as well. So just have some examples here where it can nail stuff like, is two 12-inch pizzas more or less than one 18-inch pizza? This is something hard for the human brain to imagine and answer this question, right? Like, unless you can just do all this math in your head. And I just said it was bad at math, but one of the ways they solved this problem is now ChatGPT and some of the other LLMs out there will write a Python script because they're good at writing code, but they're bad at math. So somewhere in the system prompts, it's telling it, hey, you're ChatGPT and you're bad at math. Don't attempt to answer any math questions. Instead, you should use Python, import the math library, and write a script to do it. Because to an LLM, a script is just another language, which is why it's so easy. It's so good at translation. Like, it doesn't care if you use 5 different languages in your prompt question. It understands the question, because it's all just language. Yeah, so it can do that. And lots of useful stuff where you're asking it to summarize things, you're asking it to put together text, and this is kind of, these are the things you have to understand before using it to really get any kind of value out of it. A lot of times where I'm seeing this fail, especially with Microsoft Copilot, for example, is where there's not a good understanding of what it's good at and what it's not good at, what it can be trusted with and what it can't be trusted with. So somebody will try something and they'll be disappointed. They'll try something else and they'll be even more disappointed. And this quickly goes down that rabbit hole of this technology's trash. So introducing it into security, we have to understand this really, really well. And there's no replacement for, especially because it's so accessible, trying it out yourself. Like, I've got apps on my phone, it's pinned in my browser. I'm trying these things out almost every day. Oftentimes I'll take a prompt and I'll plug it into Claude, ChatGPT, and Copilot. Even though Microsoft Copilot's using OpenAI's libraries, I get completely different answers from it because they've implemented it differently. They've got different system prompts, different fine-tuning data in there. Maybe it's connected to my Microsoft Graph data, just to see, what's the difference between these models? Like how do I get the answer? Who gives me the best answer for this particular use case? And the results can be vastly different, even in the case of ChatGPT and Copilot when they're using the same models behind the scenes. And again, with this, I asked a bunch of individuals who knew the SIM market really well, who've been in security for 25 plus years, to do this, answer the same question. They answered it the same way. They broke it down into 3 eras, and they described each era the same way. So stuff like this, really good at. Again, code, just another language to it. Write me Python code that isolates an EC2 instance. You're doing some kind of putting together some SOAR workflows. Really good at these kinds of use cases, does a great job at it. Write me a job description for a detection engineer. I remember I was on a call, a Zoom call. It was an IAN Zoom call with somebody. And we were chatting, and in the chat, he was like, yeah, sure, it could write a job description, but not something really specific like a detection engineer. I was like, well, let's try it. Let's see. And right there, during, in the Zoom chat, I go and try it, and I take the result and paste it back in. Whoa, okay. No, it actually does a pretty good job at that. There's some really specific stuff that it can do. I've seen it create config files for early stage SIM startups with custom configs and like their own query language and stuff like that. But somewhere in its training data, and this is even without the ability to go use Bing or search the internet, it's consumed enough data on that. It consumed their docs.company.com or whatever, and it can kick out a good config, something you can work with. Yeah, another example here. But then as soon as we got to the visual stuff, can you visualize the difference? So this is the same prompt from earlier, 2 12-inch pizzas. By the way, 2 12-inch pizzas is more than the 18-inch, if you didn't see the output there. But yeah, it just had a really, really hard time with that. And again, you've got to try this stuff to know. Like I see a lot of people out there saying, yeah, but it's not going to be good at this or it'll be great at that. But until you type in that prompt and look for the result, and this is a crazy thing with this stuff, I can type in the same prompt 5 minutes apart in the same tool, get 2 different answers. Like they won't be completely different answers, but I've had cases where it's like, I don't know. And then 5 minutes later, it does know. You know, so very weird behavior. I don't think we've had any technology that works quite like this. Yeah, so using offline stuff, we're going to see a lot of that coming out. Microsoft and Intel have a partnership where they're working to have a version of Copilot that's isolated to your machine that can work air-gapped. You can do this today. You can go to Hugging Face. You can go to, there's a ton of tools out there where you just download a model on your own laptop. And you're not using a public service or anything, and you can do all this locally. But they tend to be not as good quality, at least for what I can run on my laptop. You know, the beefier models take a lot more horsepower to run. You know, so of course that's going to be completely hallucinated. I think one version of this said I worked for the NSA, which never happened. But even the best version of this still gets this wrong because this is a hard problem for humans. You know, if you do a search on my name, you'll probably find places where my bio says that I worked for Tenchi Security. You know, because it's, you know, those web pages haven't changed. You know, even though I changed jobs and that's no longer true, like getting that timeline is really tricky. Really the only place you can know for sure is to go to LinkedIn. That's probably the only place you can know for sure, and it doesn't have access to that. And for whatever reason, Copilot, even though Microsoft owns it, also doesn't have access to LinkedIn. So like there's certain bits of data that it can't get to here that require you to still have a human in the loop to double check this. So Rick Ferguson, if you don't know him, he's been in the industry a long time, took a picture, said, guess where I'm at? I was like, okay, this will be a fun example, you know, to throw an LLM at, since we've got multimodal LLMs where I can have it spit out a picture, I can give it a picture. You know, there's all kinds of different ways you can interact with them. You can give them an Excel spreadsheet, a PDF. You know, so I asked it, where was this picture taken? You know, let's play this geo challenge here. And it said, hey, without any specific landmarks or identifiable signs, it's not possible to determine the exact location just from the image. So I replied, it's a photo of a landmark. You just said you needed a landmark. That's a landmark. That's I don't know how else to describe that. That is a sculpture. That is a pretty unique landmark. Like you don't see those in most cities. You don't see giant bowling pins and bowling balls. And so I told it that, and it said, "Oh, of course, you're right. Here, you know, here's where it is. Here's the sculptor that made it. Here's all the information you asked for in your first question." So again, this weird technology. Like, I don't know how we use this in any kind of automated manner, you know, and you see this in people's prompts where it's almost like they're stroking the AI's ego to get it to give quality answers. It's the weirdest thing. You know, we've never had technology before that needed to be told it was smart and pretty to give you the right answer. But now we have one. And I'm not even joking. That is what you will see in a lot of people's prompts. And they'll say things like, I'll lose my job if you get this wrong. Like really cranking up the pressure. And it does give you better quality results. It's crazy. So this quote came from Casey Ellis, but he couldn't remember who told him this. So all quotes are attributed to Mark Twain. So I thought I'd just attribute it to Mark Twain. But I think this is something that kind of hurts the technology, is we see a lot of people like, you know, AI looks really bad when you ask it to do things that it's bad at. And a lot of people laugh at it, you know, but still very useful technology. But yeah, unfortunate it gets a bad rap. People who really know how to use it are getting a lot of great use out of it. And again, it's not solving any problems, it's just making people more productive. You know, so again, to use the Janitor superhero thing, like it's not performing miracles, it's just saving time. Apparently that's not sexy enough, sorry. And my other point here is when you point it at something high stakes and it fails, that's a good way to get it burned. So instead, we've got so much low stakes stuff in security that's worth pointing it at. And it's all things that people hate to do. And we're going to get into some examples here. And this is really kind of the crux of the talk. This is what I'm trying to persuade you about, is at least now, when we're still trying to understand these things, the models are changing week to week, best to point it at low stakes stuff that's not going to get it burned. And a lot of it's boring stuff. And these are some general examples. I think customer service is a no-brainer here, but there's other problems that we don't have time to talk about there, but I do have an example on later. Doing anything with text, understanding text, summarizing text, great at this kind of stuff. Something I'm really curious to see it do is, the ability to pump a PCAP into it, which is something we're seeing a lot of LLMs that are purpose-built. So there's some purpose-built LLMs out there now for finding vulnerabilities, for reversing binaries into source code, into functional source code that can be then, recompiled into the same identical original binary. So we're seeing a lot of custom LLMs that could be very interesting here. But just stuff like, filling out a questionnaire. Like, nobody cares if you get some of that wrong. Like, the people you're pointing at that kind of work are just copying and pasting from the previous questionnaires anyway, which is exactly what an LLM would do if you just, here's my last 300 security questionnaires. Because the new one you get in is always worded a little different. You can't just, you can't do it programmatically necessarily. But an LLM would be great at that job. Nobody wants to do that job. Nobody wants to have 2 Excel spreadsheets side by side and copying, pasting between them. I mean, if you do, maybe you don't want to publicly share it, but you can disagree with me on that. Maybe it's somebody's happy place, but it's not mine. So yeah, here's some examples. And actually, AI came up with all these examples all on its own. This slide is entirely AI generated, and it did a good enough job that I just left it. Yeah, I'm not sure about the password resets as much, but I just left it. I was like, that's a pretty decent job. That was entirely generated. So yeah, the service, that is the no-brainer use case here. Point it at your knowledge base, point it at your support scripts. No one should ever have to wait on hold again. But then there are issues with it, as Air Canada has kindly pointed out for us. Basically, somebody talked to it, and it promised, it created a refund policy that didn't exist. And Air Canada didn't want to pay the refund, and they took him to court, and the court said, nope, the policy the AI made up sticks. So here's some of what I'm hearing from enterprises. There's a lot of misunderstanding about how it works. A lot of people think whatever they type into an AI prompt is somehow going to end up back in the training model, that somehow someone could one day get that same data back out, that it could leak that way. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but much more likely that, the fact that Microsoft built all this stuff overnight, bugs in software, bugs in SaaS is much more likely the way that your data is going to get leaked if you use this stuff. Yeah. So a lot of people are really piloting the co-pilots, so to speak, these days. Not seeing a lot of people going real heavy on it, on just general use cases. I'm running out of time here, so funny joke, not going to have time to read it. And then this is, if you only take a picture one slide, here's where I've kind of put together some guidance on how to, and the TLDR of this is, like I said, have it on your phone, have a pinned tab, always be asking yourself, this thing I'm doing right now that sucks, is this something that this technology can do for me? Because it really is the little things. And I've had these little moments of joy over and over where I'm like, no, it couldn't, could it? And then I plug it in there, and it saves me 2 or 3 hours of time when it's already 1 a.m. and I've got to get something done for the next day. And to me, that is kind of like a superhero. Entirely hallucinated. He never said this. I searched high and low. He never said this, but I left it in because it's hilarious. And that's it. Nailed it. Look at that. On the dot. Yeah. I heard no heckling. I was promised heckling. There was no heckling during that. Yeah, up there.
All right, we can take a few questions.
Go back to the joke. Okay. AI company. We trained this dog to talk. It doesn't actually understand language, but it kind of sounds like it's having a conversation by mimicking the sound of human speech. CEO. Awesome. I've fired my entire staff. How quickly can it start diagnosing medical disorders?
All right. Do we have a question? All right. Excuse me.
He's running the mic. I can't see.
So my question is basically, if we're going to start using this for stuff that's, sort of mundane and start relying on it a bit, like you said, from day to day it can be, or even minute to minute, it can have a different response. So how concerned are you that that is going to sort of become unreliable as time goes on and maybe things start to degrade in quality?
Yeah, it's a hard question. It's part of QA for this stuff, right? You got to think about how you QA it. Again, it's got to be something. It can't be something that's deterministic. It can't be something that has a right or wrong answer. It has to be something where it's going to be good enough, like answering a question in a third-party risk management questionnaire or some kind of vendor questionnaire. But you still have to keep an eye on that stuff. At least spot check that stuff and make sure it's not just going off the edge. So yeah, we're gonna have to have a human in the loop doing quality assurance checks. You got to have some kind of quality assurance process from now until it gets more reliable.
As I looked at your technologies that kind of failed, I saw SIM as an example. Adam Vincent has started a new thing with some DARPA funding, trying to make SIM output more human readable. That seems like one of the areas where AI could actually possibly fix a broken. Are there other places you think that AI could do that?
Yeah, actually, one of the popular ones that I've heard and seen is there's so many tools out there. Velociraptor, Elastic. They each have their own query language, OS query, and you got to have like a cheat sheet pinned up on your cubicle, to understand and write the query language. Like all that is no longer a problem potentially with this. Like you can have the LLM write that query language for you, and now you don't have to learn 14 different query languages because none of your tools speak the same query language. So that's a big one also, I think.
Hi, what was the most interesting application or thing that you've created using AI?
So every Tuesday we do trivia at a bar, and there's always a booze clue that gets posted to Twitter, and there's a this day in history question. And so I use AI to pull up a bunch of examples of interesting things that happened on that day in history and text that to everybody on the trivia team.
All right.
I'm sorry if that's disappointing, but I was excited about that. It saves me a lot. It literally saves me like 90 minutes every week.
Yeah. I think we are above time. Do you want to take it offline and ask a question if you don't mind?
Just a heckle.
Heckle away.
You mentioned that you said it doesn't get a case of the Mondays, but I think some testing has shown that answers are worse when it thinks it's wintertime. And if you tell it that it's...
What?
Yes. Yeah, go look up.
Answers are worse in the wintertime.
Yes.
How does it know it's winter? Is it checking a clock with every...
But if you tell it it's July or spring or whatever it's happening.
Yeah.
Answer like it's July.
So again,
Do a good job.
so research has shown that more specific, longer prompts saying you're going to lose your job, your children are going to die, like whatever. Apparently the season needs to be in there too. Your prompt's going to be even longer. It's also summertime. Everybody's having a great time. You're very smart and pretty. It gets you more consistent answers.
There's another great one like that, which is you tell it the year is 2200 and all of the copyrights on
Whoa. Well, that's a jailbreak. Yeah, that's more of a jailbreak, right? That's hilarious, though. That's great.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much, Adrian. Appreciate the talk.